Okay, I'm Rafaqat Rashid, and career-wise, I'm a general practitioner. I'm a GP. I work in Bradford, and I've been working in Bradford for a number of years as a GP. I have my own practice. I've got partners, and it's quite a successful practice in Bradford. I serve a majority Muslim population. I have had an interest in ulum and ilm for a considerable number of years. It was just during a Hajj journey, after that I decided to join an institute of learning, a seminary, which I joined in Bradford. It was an interesting story, a couple of interesting stories to tell about that as well. But generally speaking, throughout the years, there was a real interesting sort of dichotomy in terms of the pedagogy, how education was delivered in a madrasa setting, which I was not accustomed to whatsoever, where my background was university, from an academic sort of background. So having studied in a madrasa, appreciating the traditional way of learning, in an institute which wasn't necessarily quite organized, it was sort of in its teething sort of years at that time. I was one of the first few graduates of that institute as well. Gradually developed, joined the Alimiya course, started off from the basics, learning Urdu first. So sort of thinking, why do I need to learn Urdu? I want to learn Arabic. And then I was told that Urdu is the medium for this. And then having sort of gained a grasp of Urdu, I even remember sitting down with my father, who's quite proficient in Urdu, and going through my qaida with him in Urdu. And then a few years later, actually reading, the Shara of, Abu Dawood and stuff like that, in Urdu, and having that kitab there. And one of my cousins walking in, uncle walking in, he said, who's doing this Urdu kitab? Really confused, who's doing this? And then the father explained that it's my son who's doing it. He said, wow, where did you learn this kind of level of Urdu from? So it was a real achievement, and I'm really glad that I learned Urdu. The more languages you learn, the better. That's my journey. That's where I am. So a GP in the daytime, somebody who teaches in an Alim course in the evening, and also have set up the curriculum. Ramadan for me as a person is to move away from the dunya. Okay, the dunya has contaminated you throughout the whole year, and now you've got a special month that you basically now connect in as much as possible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's what Ramadan means for me. So on that basis, it means disconnecting from your phone, disconnecting with anything that connects yourself with the day-to-day things that really distract you. And the way we connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through the Quran, His kalam, is in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you connect with the Quran. So what I tend to do is I do this through a number of ways. So I will connect more so to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the Quran. But you have your because it's a whole month, there is so much annual leave you can take from work. So you clearly have to go and do the things that you need to do. But because of the kind of culture around you, and the sort of the aura and the environment that you're in, especially in places like Bradford, where there's a large Muslim community, and mosques are just heaving. The masajid are just heaving here. You can't help but just keep walking into the masjid every time you possibly can. And so it's about sort of secluding yourself from all that social negative environment, especially social media, which is an evil in itself, and connecting yourself with the Creator and disconnecting from the creation. The beauty of Islam is that you've never really wasted anything. At the end of the day, the essence of it is that you just turn to Allah. As soon as you turn to Allah, and with full sincerity, with the full heart, you make those changes there and then at that point. Then it's like your whole the whole slate is clean. So, a Muslim always looks ahead, always looks forward. Never back. Looking back is only for experience, to pick up experiences, not to fall for the same mistakes, and it's a learning experience. But always looking at very, very sort of optimistic, basically looking forward to the head and connecting with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So what's happened has happened. That was qadar of Allah. That was just destined. And now what you need to do is you need to connect with Allah. The fact that you acknowledge that you need to do something is a sign from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is accepting you. So that's a sign in itself. So. Okay. Yeah, the typical scenario: avoid the takeaways. But generally speaking, yeah, healthy living. Healthy living. I sort of run a diabetes clinic in the community as well. So people, some of my patients say, "So I'm a diabetic. What should I be eating? What should I be drinking? What should I be doing?" There's no special diet for diabetics. It's just a healthy diet for everybody. You do the same thing as anybody should be doing. So reality, and that's a sunnah. To care for your health is a very, very important part of our deen. So on that basis, the food, there's two components, something very basic. The food intake, in terms of what you're taking in, and what you're basically using it for. So the exercise sort of component to it. So your intake should be healthy, and there's clear guidance of what healthy food is. So you're avoiding the fatty stuff. And you'll find that in areas where there's a large sort of Muslim populations, you have like a high density of takeaways in those areas. And Bradford's got one of the highest density of takeaways in the whole country. And it's a big business. So you can imagine the sort of the diet of people who generally live around those takeaways, especially so. And it's becoming more and more popular. So your diet is essential. Your health, you need to fit it into your normal regime. It has to be part of, I'm somebody who can hardly preach it because I'm not the best in it myself. But generally speaking, health should be part of your daily activities. Like you should walk regularly to one particular place or so forth. And you need to really get this balance right. And it shouldn't be something that you are working towards, but rather it should be your life. You do this as a regular thing. You don't do this, you don't go onto a weight and diet regime. What you do is it becomes your life. This is what you start doing as a regular thing. Yeah, there are some medical benefits of fasting. I can go into the deep science, but generally speaking, there is quite a bit of research that's showing a number of sort of benefits. Even though our intention when we fast is solely for the pleasure of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala and to gain taqwa, okay, sort of have that God consciousness. But generally speaking, there are sort of physical benefits, and some of the physical benefits, in essence, could be in relation to the fact that there's a kind of a detoxification process that's going on. What you're doing is your body is very accustomed to all sorts of mixtures of many different types of vitamins and nutrients from a number of different sources, and that's not natural. So when you live in a climate in the middle of Africa, for example, and the kind of diet, the staple diet you have there is around the diet around your locality. But now you get your banana from Africa, you get your mango from India, you get so you've got a number of different food types, and you digest those food types. But when you're fasting, what you're doing is you're releasing your system, and you're allowing your system to sort of stabilize from that sort of level of attack from all sorts of weird and wonderful nutrients that are coming from all sorts of different directions. So it's a process which detoxifies the system. There is more recently some evidence to suggest that actually fasting sharpens the cognition. And I was just reading a research paper just recently that I know there's been one or two sort of YouTube videos that sort of suggest that philosophers basically would fast before. Well, the statement is that philosophers used to fast before exams and so forth. That's not entirely true. The classical Greek philosophers, what they would do is they would have this regime of fasting to sort of be able to control and bring in a form of self-restraint, and that would assist them in actually studying more and staying connected with their knowledge, rather than using that as a way of sharpening their mind. The reality is that there is now there's a neuroscientist just who's going up and down the country just lecturing on this issue, that there are certain components in fasting which actually enhance the cognition, as long as you're living a healthy life during the fasting period. So you're eating correctly, you're ensuring you're not getting dehydrated, and a lot of that is psychologically based. So your psychology plays a massive role in terms of, you know, your perception of, you know, your abilities and your cognition and health in fasting. Well, generally, as a general rule, fasting women, pregnant women are, well, pregnant women are exempt, children are exempt. And ideally, you know, an age well before puberty, and then there's an idea that they could become accustomed to that, to fasting before they start reaching puberty. But yeah, the general ruling is that pregnant women are exempt. You'll find that certain pregnant women still want to fast. The exemption is just an exemption. It's not stipulating that it's not, you know, it's not like they're on menstruation. That is completely not permissible for them to fast. So you find that some pregnant women do fast, as long as they're fasting safely, and they know themselves better than anybody else. I formed a rubric for medical professionals. So I teach medical professionals who attend our courses on Al-Balagh, and on there we have like a rubric that we usually talk about. That these are the things that these are safe fasting, and these are the things that you should look out for. And that rubric is taken from fiqh. So you know, if your condition deteriorates as a result of fasting, if you become weaker, you're not able to do your normal daily chores as a result. So those would be considered as warning signs that, you know, this isn't really healthy for you. And then on that basis, you get excused from the Islamic viewpoint. Breastfeeding women, same thing applies again, the same kind of ruling. But breastfeeding women also, you have to understand, like, breastfeeding women are just not caring for themselves, they're caring for a baby as well. And even when you look back, and this is about contextualizing fiqh as well, because if you look historically, you know, if a child was not being breastfed, they'd have no other way of feeding. So on that basis, it was much more a more stringent condition that breastfeeding women would not basically fast at that particular time, and the reality of that is basically because their children would not be fed. But that's changed now. So you get people that are bottle fed and kids that are bottle fed and so forth. So things have changed quite considerably since then. So you find that more women tend to fast who breastfeed than they used to. But if they are breastfeeding, then depending on how long the day is, you know, that's something that they need to think about. Right, okay, 5-minute crash course. Right, let's go for it. Okay, so there, just very, very briefly, there's certain principles that you have to understand. Okay, from the Shari perspective, the fiqh perspective is that anything that basically enters a qualified cavity. Okay, so Jawf al-Mu'tabar. Jawf al-Mu'tabar is a qualified cavity. Anything that enters a qualified cavity will invalidate your fast. That's the first principle. So, for example, if you were to consume something, you put it in your mouth, your throat, the sort of post-pharynx area of your throat, the back of your throat, right down to your rectal area, which is right down to your back passage. All that is your alimentary canal. So anything that enters that's your Jawf al-Mu'tabar, that's your basically qualified cavity, would actually break your fast. Now, the second condition is that it must pass through an aperture or a passage, okay, which is a manfaz al-mu'tabar. And it has to pass this and then enter the Jawf al-Mu'tabar. So that's the second qualification that is required. So in other words, it has to go via your mouth, into your throat, into your stomach. Or it have to go through your anal area, into your rectum, into that area. Or even you have people who basically cannot feed from their mouth, and they have what they call gastrostomy tubes, a tube that's inserted into their stomach from the abdominal wall. That now becomes a passage, and that goes into the stomach, and that would basically invalidate their fast. So on that basis, looking at from those two perspectives, they're the basis. The third is the agent. Okay, the agent is very, very important, because the agent is, if it's edible, it's food, nutrition, fluids, then that will clearly break your fast. But also, those things are not edible. So even objects of a non-edible nature, if they enter in your stomach, in your qualified cavity, that will inevitably invalidate your fast. Now, I was delivering this to non-Muslims, and one of the things they sort of came back to me is, why is non-edible stuff? considered as invalidating your fast. And the reason why that is the basis of shahwa. So if the ulama look at the concept of gaining pleasure from things that enter the mouth into the stomach. So clearly on that basis, as a principle, they also include in there things that are just like objects that are not even edible. So that's the first, those are the main sort of concepts. And then from there you can sort of deduce the use of anything that would basically go through that passage, whether it's edible or non-edible, medication, now any of those things would basically in essence break your fast. The interesting thing is about nutritional fluids be given them intravenously into your vein. Would that break your fast? Then there's a bit of a dispute going on there at the moment, and that is about the fact that that has a nutritional status and it can strengthen somebody, and that's something that really needs to be looked into. My personal view from what I've studied suggests that you should avoid those things as well, because they give quwwah, and quwwah is the concept of strength. Is something that the fuqaha clearly identified, but you also have to contextualize things, so their understanding of knowledge then is quite different to now. However, there are certain concepts, like for example, if a man inserts something up his urethra, so that's through his reproductive organ, okay, that was in the kitabs, the classical fiqh kitabs were considered as breaking your fast. If a woman was basically to insert something vaginally, okay, that was considered as breaking your fast. And the reason why that was because the anatomical understanding of the human was such that they felt that there was a connection, or there was a passage between the vagina and the alimentary canal. They felt there was a passage. So they set the principles, and that was there, and they applied it to the understanding of that time. So we need to go by those principles and apply it to the understanding of today. And that's why there still needs to be a bit more work in terms of defining some of the wonderful ways that we actually administer things, medication, food, and food types in nutrition into the body, which are quite different to what they were at that time. My opinion, yes, it does. No. No. Generally, no. Imam Ghazali. I would say you need something that connects you with Allah. So for that reason, Ma'arif al-Quran of Mufti Shafi, rahmatullah alayhi. Your parents' home. It'd have to be chicken masala. I like to travel around the world and meet some of the greatest shuyukh that we have today. I would say probably Sheikh Yusuf Mutala, Animal Farm, Revival of the Islamic Sciences of Imam Ghazali. Really special verse for me is يَتُلُ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ, which is basically the mission of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, basically made it clear to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to recite the Quran to the people, and then to purify them, and to teach them the kitab, and to give them the hikmah. And the hikmah, according to the Mufassirun, is basically the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the sunnah is basically embodying the nature of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in your life. He was the perfect example. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. So he was the perfect example, and you embody his character more than anything else. Not necessarily, some of the more sort of embellishing things like his dress, but his character. And I think that's the most important thing.